Congress heads for a showdown on the debt ceiling, the first big test of state vaccine mandates happening here in New York, and Facebook halting work on an Instagram for kids for now. Tuesday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Tuesday, September 28th. I'm Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Hello, Carlo.
Good morning, Wags. How you doing?
I'm good. How's it going over there?
It's going. I actually.
I just saw some shorts. Did I just see a knee?
Yes, you saw a knee.
Busted.
You got busted. Yep. Yeah, look, business up top and casual down bottom. You know how it goes, Jill. Wait, what was I going to say? Oh, I had a new parenting question I meant to ask you last night. I thought of it. So when you've got the baby and you're doing the nap transfer, you know what I mean? Like when the baby falls asleep in your arms and then you're trying to get her to like a surface, like a bed or something. Do you do it fast, like in one fell swoop, or do you sort of like inch your way to it to try not to wake her up? You know what I mean?
I tend to go slow. It's not like a Band-Aid where you got to rip it off. I tend to me, I go really slow. And we even do it now. And my daughter's much bigger than obviously Franny. But it's tough. You just have to.
Oh, man,
it's like an art.
It really is an art that I have not yet mastered. But thank you.
Okay, let's get to some news here. The federal government on the brink of shutting down after Senate Republicans blocked a bill that would have both funded the government and suspended the federal borrowing limit. Democrats say they're going to try to pass that spending bill again before the Thursday deadline. In the House, Speaker Nancy Pelosi telling her rank and file that they have to pass that bipartisan infrastructure bill this week and not wait for the other bigger spending bill, as some of the progressives in the Democratic Party have demanded.
Yeah, that's a turnaround for Pelosi. She had previously said that those two bills, she wanted both those two bills at the same time. So she's changing her tune, which sets up a nail-biter vote on the infrastructure package. That's probably also going to happen on Thursday. Pelosi doesn't bring bills to the floor that she doesn't have the votes for. So I think she thinks that she has the votes for this. I'm not so sure that it's going to pass. A lot of these progressives could try and torpedo it at the last minute, since that $3.5 trillion bill isn't really anywhere close to being done. So, we got to keep an eye on that. I think Pelosi will get it done, but we'll see. On the debt ceiling shenanigans, I mean, this is all just political posturing. Nobody wants the country to default, like nobody. So I basically have the view that, like, they'll work it out. I hope so.
I think that we should. I agree. I'm not entirely worried about a government shutdown. I've interviewed tons of investors on Wake Up with Cheddar. None seem concerned about a government shutdown. The thinking is that it's probably not going to happen. I don't think it's a horrible idea to pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill and then spend a little time on the bigger bill. There's so much in it. And I actually think that you and I should spend a little time on one of the podcasts later this week or maybe next week talking about what's actually in that bill. The bigger bill.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure.
I think
it's a good idea.
I think it's important. And I don't know, with such a massive dollar amount that we're talking here and huge things in terms of social policies and kind of the social safety nets. And I don't know. I think why rush it? Why jam it through like that? Why not take the time?
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think Democrats don't have much time to get it done because they're going to lose the House next year and probably the Senate too. But I don't really see why they have to do it like this week. You're right.
Thousands of healthcare workers across New York at the risk of imminently losing their jobs after the deadline passed last night for the state's vaccine mandate. Governor Kathy Hochul took executive action to allow for medically trained National Guard troops to fill in for those who have refused to get vaccinated. They could be fired today. It would be one of the first big tests of state employer mandates. Meanwhile, a federal appeals court is allowing New York City's vaccine mandate for school employees to go forward next week. That was a big one. The teachers, that was supposed to take effect yesterday, and it was in court, so it is now allowed to move forward.
Yeah, I think de Blasio gave them like a week to get it in order. Wow, look at Hochul there, coming out swinging. I like it. I did want to mention in Washington, both President Biden and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell both got their boosters yesterday. Biden got his on live TV. McConnell got his and said it was an easy decision. I got, say what you will about Mitch McConnell, but he has been one of the most publicly pro-vaccine Republicans in Congress, really in the country, and I give him a lot of credit for that. He struggled. He was a polio survivor, I believe. He's been around.
Yes.
So he's not one to get sort of caught up in any of this anti-vax stuff.
Well, he spoke. That's what he spoke about when he got his booster, and he spoke to the press. He said, "I had polio as a kid before there were vaccines available. I realized that vaccines are magic. You take them."
Yes, right. Good for him. One thing that I wanted to mention, and I don't have an answer for this, and I wonder if anybody else does, because I cannot figure this out, and I know it's my job to. There's this disparity between the percentage of fully vaccinated Americans and partially vaccinated Americans that doesn't really seem to budge. So according to the White House, 75% of the adult population is currently partially vaccinated. 56% are fully vaccinated. So that's a delta of about 20%, and it doesn't seem to be getting smaller, which you'd think that it would as more people get their second shot.
Right.
And I can't really figure that out. Are there really that many people walking around who just got one shot and then just decided for whatever reason they weren't going to get the second? That seems awfully strange to me.
I guess the answer is yes. Maybe there's people who, for mandate purposes, but I think you need to be fully vaccinated, right? For under some of these mandates.
Exactly. That's why I don't think that could be it. I don't know. I mean, there's probably some people who literally just forgot, I guess, or just didn't have the time to get their second. I don't know. It just seems like that's 19%. That's pretty big.
Unless there are people who had COVID, because there are some studies out there that show that if you actually have had COVID, you might only need one shot.
Maybe that's part of it. That could be part of it.
R. Kelly found guilty in his federal racketeering and sex trafficking trial. The disgraced R&B singer now faces the possibility of life in prison. Jurors took just 2 days, 9 hours to return a guilty verdict on all counts of the 6-week trial in Brooklyn, in which 11 of Kelly's victims described a decades-long scheme of exploitation and abuse at the hands of one of the most popular artists in the country.
He's going to be sentenced in May of next year. But wow, talk about a downfall, right? And it was really with R. Kelly. It was that documentary. Remember that doc? I forget where it was. It wasn't Netflix. It was like A&E maybe or something.
Surviving
Lifetime?
R. Kelly, right?
Yeah. That was really the documentary that spurred all of this in this latest trial, which is really one of the more significant of the Me Too era. I think one of the big debates is going to be now, what do people do about his music? There's this fascinating debate about, in the streaming era, right? Because the Spotify and et cetera could just take that music off of their catalogs now if they're pressured to do so, which would make it virtually unlistenable in this day and age. I don't agree with that, but it's an interesting debate that I'd be curious to have.
Right, Michael Jackson. You don't hear a lot of Michael Jackson anymore. His music, it's kind of the same type of thing. It is interesting that you talk about that documentary, because it was also the Britney Spears documentary that I think New York Times did that really got things moving with the conservatorship.
Totally.
On to R. Kelly, though. Gloria Allred, who, she's gone after Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, a lot of these guys. She said that of all of them, of all the quote-unquote predators, she said R. Kelly is the worst, which is
I didn't see that. Wow.
Pretty fascinating. Also
worse than Jeffrey Epstein.
I know, right? Also interesting in this case, prosecutors charged him with racketeering, which is not what you would have thought. And it's sometimes what prosecutors use against the mafia, financial type of crimes. But it was just kind of a way for them to get around the statute of limitations for some of these sexual abuse charges. And a lot of experts who watch this stuff say it could change the way that prosecutors go after some of these sexual predators in the future, kind of trying to find
that's interesting.
A little bit of just a different type of charge.
Yeah, using the old RICO statutes of the 80s.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting.
An update on something we've been talking about when it comes to conflicts of interest in the market. 2 top officials over at the Fed are resigning after coming under scrutiny for stock market trades that they made while the Fed was intervening to shore up financial markets last year. Robert Kaplan, head of the Dallas Fed, he's going to be leaving his post next month. He reportedly bought and sold millions of dollars worth of individual stocks in 2020.
That announcement coming just hours after Eric Rosengren, he was the head of the Boston Fed, said that he's going to take an early retirement due to some health issues. Rosengren also, according to reports, an active trader of REITs, real estate investment trusts, last year, while the Fed was setting policy on mortgage-backed securities, which, I mean, it's like just not a good look, right? Like, just we've talked about this before. There's nothing really left to say that these guys in Congress at the Fed can be trading individual securities while making monetary policy is just beyond me.
You know, I don't blame them. I blame the rules governing it, because
Sure.
chances are, if you're going to be in a position to be running a Fed, right? If you're the Fed president in Chicago or wherever else, you probably are investing in the markets. I would hope that you have some sort of expertise.
Right.
I remember when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she was on the financial committee, and I remember she was questioning Ben Bernanke, or at least referring to him, and like it was very clear she'd literally never heard of him. Okay, so
Right.
So when you think about who's on these committees and who's making policies and stuff, you would like some familiarity, I would think,
sure.
with policies, and not like, never traded a stock before or have any understanding of the market. The thing is, once you get into one of these positions, then you should probably have to either, as
Blind
you
trust.
said, put it in a blind trust or something like that. So I don't necessarily fault these guys, but I fault the policy surrounding it. And Congress, the problem with Congress, though, again, as I've mentioned 100 times on this podcast, is that the rules, I guess, could you say you blame them or you don't blame them for basically trading stocks that they're making laws about, the industries. The rules, they would create the rules that they would have to follow. So that's the problem with Congress. Somebody needs to get in there and say, God, you can't do this because it's too much of a conflict of interest.
At the very least, there should just be a rule like you can only trade ETFs or like broad-based index funds. It just seems crazy to be like, I'm going to make I'm making policy that directly affects a company like Apple while trading Apple
I'm not
shares,
allowed
right?
to really have stocks and trade, and
no.
I influence nothing. I mean, it's crazy. I'm not making policies here. Okay, I want to get to this story about Facebook, which now says it is pausing development of an Instagram app that was specifically tailored for kids. We were calling it Instagram Kids. Instagram head Adam Mosseri writing in a statement that he still thinks that an app for children as young as 10 is, quote, the right thing to do, but that the company wants time to work with parents, experts, policymakers, and regulators. The news of the halt follows a recent report that found Facebook's own data had found that the app had become toxic for teen girls.
I found that statement that Mosseri made was so revealing. I'm just going to read it again. Making an Instagram for kids is the, quote, right thing to do. Not just that it's a good business decision because, they're approaching full penetration of adult users and they need more users, right? That's what this is all about, I think. But that it's right. It's morally right. I mean, first of all, imagine thinking that. Imagine thinking that a social media platform for children is the morally right thing to do. But it just speaks to something, and I was thinking about this yesterday, and I was really getting enraged, actually, because I just find it's something that I find so insidious about Facebook in particular. A lot of these companies, but particularly Facebook, and particularly Facebook's top executives like Mark Zuckerberg, Sheryl Sandberg, this guy, Mosseri, because it's not just that they go to work every day actively making the world a worse place, in my opinion, making us more divided and our kids more anxious, more depressed. It's that they then go home at night thinking that they're helping, right? It's sociopathic, really, when you think about it. I mean, at least with big tobacco, you never had cigarette executives. You never had like R.J. Reynolds, CEO, coming out and being like, oh, we're actually doing good for the world. I sleep well at night. No, they knew that they were selling, cancer sticks, but it made them money. So that's what they did. That, to me, is actually less troubling than what these guys are doing. These people actually believe that they're helping the world. Now, Facebook's argument here, what Mosseri has said, is more or less like, hey, young kids are getting on Instagram anyway, right? We might as well make a product just for them that has some bumpers, some guardrails, right? But again, I go back to big tobacco. It's like Philip Morris saying, hey, 12-year-olds are, smoking cigarettes, so why don't we just make a cigarette that has less, maybe it has half the tar, right? Less nicotine. And I know that I compare Facebook to big tobacco a lot, but that is really how I think of it now. The problem with these platforms, Instagram and Facebook, it's intrinsic to the product. That's the issue.
Okay, so I'm going to just read from what Adam Mosseri wrote on Twitter. He released a statement about Instagram Kids, and I for the most part agree with you, and I'm not a fan of Facebook or Instagram. in terms of the impact that it's having on anybody's mental health. I do think, however, okay, and I was like, Instagram kids, could you have a worse idea? I was in your camp for a long time, and maybe I'm drinking the Kool-Aid here, but I did read his statement that he put out, and there's merit in it, okay? So I just want to read it to just give his arguments, okay? So he says, we're pausing Instagram kids, although, as you mentioned, we believe building it is the right thing to do, okay? He says, us pausing doesn't change the status quo. Under 13s are getting phones, misrepresenting their age, and downloading 13-plus apps, or apps for 13-year-olds and older. YouTube and TikTok saw this happening and made under 13 products. We were doing the same. I have to believe parents would prefer the option for their children to use an age-appropriate version of Instagram that gives them oversight than the alternative. But I'm not here to downplay their concerns. We have to get this right. While we stand by the need to develop this experience, we've decided to pause to give us time to work with parents, experts, policymakers, and regulators, listen to their concerns, and demonstrate the value and importance of this project for younger teens online today. This experience was never meant for kids. We were designing an experience for tweens, 10 to 12-year-olds. It was never going to be the same as Instagram today. Parents approve tween accounts and have oversight over who they follow, who follows them, who messages them, time spent, etc. But the project leaked way before we knew what it would be. People feared the worst, and we had few answers at that stage. Recent Wall Street Journal reporting caused even greater concern. It's clear we need to take more time on this. Anyway, I could go on. But two takeaways there. One is that it was for kids 10 to 12, right? So Instagram Kids makes it sound like you want 7 and 8-year-olds on Instagram. And he does make a good point about some of these other platforms. You do have YouTube Kids, you know, Facebook. And the other thing he says is that, which I totally agree with, like, they have no goodwill from the public right now. So the problem, which he acknowledged, is he says, quote, people feared the worst, and we had few answers at that stage. People fear the worst because of everything that they know about your product up until now.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
They're getting, no one's extending them any sort of like credit and thinking, oh, they're going to do the right thing. So
exactly.
That is the point. However, I understand what he is saying, and when Alex turns 10 or 11 and 12 and wants to go online, I would rather her on a product for kids versus just sending her into the wilds of Instagram and God knows what she's going to find.
No, I think this is a tough one, right? This stuff is really tough. But I think what you said really hits the nail on the head. You can't trust Facebook to do that, right? They have just shown themselves time and time again to be in the business of just, making products that make us more divisive and spend more time reading their ads and online, and I just don't trust them. I don't really trust Google to do it with YouTube Kids anyway. I don't really have any experience with that platform.
I don't trust any of them, but they rolled it out. Like, I certainly am not giving any of them the benefit of the doubt, but YouTube rolled out YouTube Kids kind of quietly while they weren't under as much scrutiny.
Right. It'd be nice if we had like a government in this country that like wasn't just asleep at the switch with some of the stuff, and maybe there's some regulations to be done. I don't know.
Well, what's going to happen is, I guess, Europe, which has been much more on top of this stuff, will hopefully come up with something, and then we'll have to follow it. Saturday Night Live losing one of its most familiar. Okay, on that though. People email us in. I want to hear what everyone thinks, actually. That's a topic I'd love to hear from our listeners about, what you think about Instagram for kids, social media, and how, if you have kids, how they use social media. What do you do to help keep them safe? I think it's an important topic, so we want to hear from you.
Need2Know at cheddar.com.
Okay, Saturday Night Live losing one of its most familiar faces, but it's not the exodus that many fans had feared. Beck Bennett is leaving the show after 8 seasons, along with newer cast member Lauren Holt. However, shockingly, Kate McKinnon, Pete Davidson, Cecily Strong, Adie Bryant, Kenan Thompson, all sticking around for at least another year, despite rumors that they wouldn't be coming back. The 47th season opens on Friday with Owen Wilson and Casey Musgraves. It's shocking, but I'm kind of psyched about it.
I was kind of bummed about Beck Bennett. I always liked him. He's really, I guess he'll go on to bigger and better things. He's really funny. SNL also adding 3 new featured players for this upcoming season. Aristotle Athari, James Austin Johnson, and Sarah Sherman. James Austin Johnson, if you don't know that name, He is. Look up his Trump impression. Have you seen it, Jill? I'll send it to
No.
you. He does the best Donald Trump impression I have ever heard. He gets Trump's like weird nasally voice down in a way that is just absolute perfection. So I'm assuming that they hired him to play Trump. At least I would hope. But anyway, yeah, if anyone wants that, just Google James Austin Johnson Trump, and you'll laugh.
So I recently started watching 30 Rock, which I'd never seen. And Alec Baldwin is obviously in it. And I just see Trump when I see him. It's hard to see anything else. But I guess, as you say, he probably won't be back to do that impression if they've got their own cast member to do it. The man who shot and nearly killed President Reagan 40 years ago is going to be a free man by next summer. Lawyers for John Hinckley Jr. have struck a deal with federal prosecutors to grant the would-be assassin an unconditional release from court supervision in June of 2022. He was released from prison back in 2016. He's been living with restrictions in Virginia, where he runs a booth at an antique show. Where Hinckley failed in his goal, Sirhan succeeded. The man convicted of assassinating Bobby Kennedy could also be released soon. His fate is in the hands of Gavin Newsom after California's parole board recommended his release last month.
I don't know if we talked. I think I was out when the Sirhan news came out.
We didn't really talk. I don't think we talked about it.
Yeah, I think it was a big deal. Well, it's sort of if you're of a certain age, these names are really, seared into your memory, I think. I find this to be a fascinating debate. We probably don't have time for it, but another thing I'm curious to hear from people, because this is sort of a debate that my dad and I got in last month after the Sirhan parole news came out. My argument was that I'm sort of like always in favor of people who have paid their debt to society to get a second chance, and incarcerating, elderly people doesn't really, serve any societal purpose. I mean, Sirhan's like in his 80s, I think, at this point. John Hinckley's a little bit younger, but he's also like an old guy now. My dad took the opposing view, and my dad's somebody who grew up in the tumult of the 60s, and he basically said that if you did something that changed or almost changed, in the case of Hinckley, the course of history by assassinating or trying to assassinate a president or somebody who was probably going to become president, then you just don't deserve to breathe free air, period. So the way he put it was, back to me, was if Lee Harvey Oswald was alive, would you support him being granted parole? And I didn't know the answer to that. So I'm curious. It's an interesting debate to have as these two guys are sort of coming up for release here.
Lee Harvey Oswald, of course, killed Kennedy, just for background,
yes.
In case anybody's...
Allegedly.
In case somebody forgot, it's early in the morning. The Reagan Library has come out adamantly against this decision about John Hinckley Jr.
Decision.
They think this is not the right call, which I thought was pretty fascinating. Okay, time for Around the Horn or Bullet Points or News Shots. These are some of the great suggestions that we've gotten.
Somebody tell us a good name here. We can't decide.
I like all of them, to be totally honest. But okay, let's get to it. An Amtrak train that derailed in rural Montana over the weekend was going just under the speed limit, according to the NTSB team that's investigating the incident. 3 people were killed, dozens wounded when the Chicago-Seattle train jumped the tracks on Saturday. This deserved, actually, I think, lead treatment, and I don't think we've covered this nearly enough. A couple things that are fascinating here, and I know this is not the point of this segment. It was a beautiful day, so weather was not a factor. The train was not going around a curve. It was a straight track there. So those are 2 reasons: bad weather and curves that trains tend to derail. That train track had been they had gone and looked at it for just maintenance just a couple weeks earlier. So this is a big question mark.
Yeah, I really don't know what to make of this, because these trains now are made so that they can't speed up anymore, something called positive train control. We'll keep an eye on this. The NTSB is investigating, as we said. Meanwhile, overseas, North Korea fired a short-range missile into the ocean. At the same moment, its envoy to the UN was speaking at the General Assembly in New York and decrying the United States' quote, hostile policy towards the North. I can't read today.
Universal vote by mail becoming law in California. The most populous state in the country will now send ballots to all registered voters, whether they asked for them or not, making a COVID-era practice permanent.
Okay, do not expect gas prices to have the customary dip that they usually do after the so-called summer driving season. Oil prices, I don't know if you've been keeping an eye on them. They are high and remaining high. Brent crude now trading above $80 a barrel. I believe Goldman Sachs yesterday said they're thinking crude oil in the U.S. going to be $90 before the winter.
Oh, wow. Netflix has released new viewing metrics that it says are the most comprehensive yet, showing not just how many people viewed the first 2 minutes of a show or movie, but the total time spent viewing. Per Netflix's own data, Bridgerton is its most watched show, while Extraction and Bird Box are its most watched movies.
And finally, Will Smith on the cover of GQ this month, opening up about his marriage to Jada Pinkett Smith in a pretty saucy interview, talking about how the couple had at one point decided that they just couldn't be monogamous and that they had both dabbled in extramarital affairs, not just her, but that he also doesn't recommend that route for others.
Okay, that is what you need to know for Tuesday, September 28th.
Happy birthday, Mom. See you guys tomorrow.